So I wasn't here for the last meeting, so we want to just recap the last meeting. We were tweaking the traditional format, and I think at the end of the meeting we're going to sort of brainstorm on our own about what to do. And we had some complaints about BIM plans in general, that there's too much information and can't be distributed or divided easily. It's not owner-driven. Needed to be able to tie into a contract. So my understanding is that we were all supposed to go away and generate something on our own. We worked on something, Nate and I did, and we'll show it to you.
Can I just mention something that Jason and I just kind of typed this up impromptu, the agenda and the recap. So if there's anything anybody remembers that's differently, then speak up, because
let's include that, because
it's not typed this right after the meeting. So
I'm going to do meeting minutes after today so that that's what we talked about, because I can't remember much between one meeting and the next. It was once a month. So yeah, if you remember something else in here that's not on the list, let's get it on there, and I'll include it in the meeting minutes.
And maybe just the gist of it, if anybody has anything else to say about this, is that I thought that last meeting we kind of hit a turning point when we started thinking of not redoing another BIM plan template, because there are plenty of them out there, and it's the format alone that just doesn't really work. I mean, we're just, the last thing we need is another template. We've all got them, and there are public ones that are big enough. And so I guess the ideas that were thrown around, everybody kind of liked, were more focused around an owner perspective. And it was highly simplified, like in a questionnaire format, the owner would just go through and pick what they want out of BIM. And I'm not even sure if you'd call this a BIM plan, but it would spit out things like schedule and pros and cons from an owner's perspective, and then it will also tie into the ins and outs that we were done, so the owner would be able to see who's responsible for what, and what the consequences of all the decisions are.
It's kind of like a menu. It's a vehicle that's going to go on the BIM plan. So something that's almost menu-driven, where they can pick visualization, energy analysis, and it could be things that are everyday things that that will define a whole series of other things, like who's responsible for that thing, how difficult is it to do, what does that person need beforehand, what dependencies, what are we relying on to be able to do this, who needs to do what before that happens. So it's almost like working backwards from the BIM plan. So we printed these out so everybody could have these, and those are our inputs and outputs. And
okay.
I think everybody for the last meeting we had here, but the last meeting we had here, I don't know if you. I just did a little PowerPoint here of. Basically, we all put note cards up on the wall, and it was done by phase. And we were separated by designers, contractors, owners, and we would put every input and output we could think of on note cards to create some kind of a comprehensive call it the meeting of the colorful note cards. So several of these, we took pictures of all these. We ended up converting all this into, Chris had put it on Xmind, and we ended up putting all of our inputs and outputs into Xmind. And Jason, you sent me.
I sent you the Xmind.
That's the composite. Okay, I was wondering where that was. That's why I came up with these JPEGs and just printed them out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we ended up, after we did all these ins and outs, I think after that we started doing looking at other BIM plans, looking at our BIM plans, And now we're to this point where we want to take it a step further. We don't really want to create another BIM plan necessarily, but something that makes the BIM plan a little more streamlined, a little more organized, and something that's a little more, I don't know, owner-driven. Right now, it's sort of like we go to these BIM meetings at the beginning of a project, and we kind of go back and forth from the owner. But we'd like something that's a little more owner-driven as well. So from that, we came to the mind mapping software and ended up with this. So, yeah, we want to make it more intuitive, easier to tailor towards specific projects. We want it to be able to tie into a schedule, contract. So I guess we can now discuss whatever we came up with. This is one of the things we came up with. I worked on this, where you've got, this would be the inputs and outputs in here. And then there's a column here for what benefit does this provide to the project, and then going over who's the one responsible, who's generating the deliverable, what format is it in, and then over here, what dependencies, who needs to do what before this can happen. So starting with that, and kind of, we could branch off from that and probably generate other variables off of this. But by picking, if the owner wants, gross area takeoffs, what implications does that have on the overall process? What implications does that have on the overall schedule? And where, if you pick one of these things, it gets assigned to a particular phase. So you then have the ability to sort of track when these things happen. And you could have this sort of inform a project schedule on when these things with the BIM model are going to need to take place. I don't know how you automate. It can happen. So I think the idea here with us is we need to generate the good idea, and then we need to think about execution, implementations after this.
Like I know Raul and Philip and Jason down together thinking, like I said, get the ideas, find topics, what the big picture pieces are, start organizing them, and creating a structure that then can be implemented into software. And for that, we will have to have, I think Raul was mentioning that reaching out towards one from Georgia Tech and seeing if we can maybe recruit grad students, somebody who's interested
Computer science
in,
majors.
Up in their career or their portfolio for a nominal cost fee of nothing. That's phenomenal.
That's a little specific.
I don't think I will find somebody who can handle the technical side of it. But we come up with the overall structure. We have a really good idea of what it is we want. Because like Ralph said, when we present it to them, we say, hey, we want here to here to here, to do this, to do that. We have to figure out what those things are.
Yeah.
And then present it. And then they'll come back to us and say, okay, this is how we go about it. Well,
we were talking about putting all this into a database, and just like Revit, generating different reports off of it, graphical, however we want it, schedule. What we need to do, the idea where we started, based on the previous discussion, was start at the owner level, and whether they want BIM or not. Why? Going back from there, and that would start turning on fields that need filled as we go along. But yeah, we just next level. Everybody needs to organize. Okay, this is my part.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
That's part of the X mind.
From an MEP standpoint, I'm going to need 50 pieces of information.
Yeah, like you pick one thing, it kind of asks you several questions, inputs that it needs to know. in order to go on to the next step. And they have to take some stuff piece by piece and
that's the whole point. That's where we should break off.
yes, I agree.
And start discussing these in detail and describing them and what format, what type of information
Where
we're
exactly drop down into the
I'm curious. I haven't been to the last few meetings, but I really like the direction that you're going in. I mean, I like the idea of simplifying and making it an owner-based requirement list. And this is because of a recent meeting I had discussing this. But and to that comment, I'm curious first if everybody is in agreement that it should go in this direction. I mean, it looks like last time it was pretty much agreed that it was the current ones are too complicated. But I mean, is everybody in agreement that it should be an owner-driven thing? The owner should be involved, but I don't know that I would say that it's driven.
Well,
I mean, maybe initiated.
Okay.
Maybe it's initiated by the owner.
there were two different sides what was done the last time. One was sort of a collaboration between all of us day-to-day, and the other was the uneducated sort of view of the owner.
Mm-hmm.
So the owner side of it would be to, one, educate the owner and have him or her understand the consequences and benefits. So in the tree structure, the simplification would be accomplished by starting with like the yes/no format. I think your example would be a good one to look at because it looked like it was pretty straightforward. So you'd get a yes/no to any question like, do you want to use BIM? And if it's yes, then you get a little bit more information about the benefit. And if it's still a yes, and you get a little more information about the consequence, and that's when it breaks off into what that means to the owner. And I like what this does because it did the yes, no, maybe, which I hadn't thought about either. But
Well, part of it's the education of the client.
yeah.
They might not know what they want until they get three-quarters.
That's exactly right. If going back, when I looked at what you all put together and reflect back on the meeting I was just in, the owner didn't even know why they were in the meeting.
Right.
They had already said use BIM as part of the project. So why are you asking me what I want to do? I'm telling you what to do. And they didn't want to get bogged down in the details of, does it need to be parametric? Does it need, I don't know if it, And another thing, every single comment was, is it going to cost more money? So you've got to, I mean, it has to be part of it, right?
I definitely
This
think
decision
if there's
costs
something that's
you
an
money.
ad service, I think that needs to be flagged by the software.
Yep.
It needs to be stated out front so that it's not a surprise to the owner. You wanted
Right.
energy analysis.
I mean, I think a big part of it for the owner, maybe not all of it, but a really big part of it is, from our perspective, the downstream aspect of it. So what does the owner want to be able to do when everything else is done? And those are the questions you really need to ask an owner, with a few exceptions of, for instance, some type of analysis, energy analysis up front or something like that. But most of that's all downstream. And then when the owner asks, is there a cost? I mean, yeah, I think there is, because if we're going to try to set it up so you can use it for FM or COBE or whatever else, information has to be input. We have to charge for all those keystrokes. Right.
Yep.
And not just the original input of it, but the maintenance of it and everything else. And then make it clear what the owner will have downstream. It will be up to the owner or someone else the owner's hired to take over. And go from there.
Well, and then also, one of the big pain points that we have during the design build process is a lot of people really don't buy into the entire process. So it's in the BIM plan, but they ignore it. So by asking those questions from the owner, getting a goal defined first is something that you can always point back to. Yes, we need it now because that depends on these people. This part of the team depends on it, and this is where we're trying to get. So it's not to get covey on it, but begin with the end in mind, and it helps you focus.
I thought one of the really nice slides from this morning's presentation at the BIM breakfast were in general, owners are, they have CapEx goals or OpEx goals. You've got owners that have a set budget, and it's all based on schedule. So anything that's going to help my schedule, get me in my building 2 days earlier, that's saving me $200,000 a day. But then you've got, healthcare folks that are going to be in the building for a long time, and they're very interested in the operations and maintenance of the building. And so we could look at it from that approach and then maybe break it down, based on that type of owner, how the questionnaire that we're going to have, for the owner, is it an owner that, is very cognizant of the schedule and they just want to be in, they're out in 5 years, and the building's going to be somebody else's, or is it someone that's going to be in it for a very long time? And those two lines of questioning are very good.
Yeah, right, so maybe you're asking all that downstream information with that in mind, in the terms the owner can understand.
Exactly. I think that and of course the questions you ask today, maybe you might not have to ask them 10 years from today because everybody knows what BIM is and why they do it and blah, blah, blah. But that's certainly not true today. I mean, when I see an owner saying, why am I in this meeting? I mean, that means they need to understand what they're being asked. And I do think the terms that you're talking about, asking somebody to say, are you more concerned with the life cycle cost of the building, or are you concerned with, lead, or are you concerned with, and then...
Is there a balance between the two of them?
Right.
Sure.
Right. And then the team says, well, here are things that we're going to do that are going to achieve your goals, and they don't really care if it's parametric modeling or Revit versus, something else. They just want that goal met. And I think that's where our meeting kind of broke down, is they were being asked specifics about programs they don't know or care about.
Right. Yeah, it's always tough to get into details with someone who's not interested.
Yeah.
And getting past the owner, you still have to leave it open to, for example, depending on how the players have been chosen by the owner, okay, wants this architect, and this architect only does it in Revit. So you will still have those kinds of projects, even though the model deliverable is not going to be counted. You still have to be able to use this, because that's the other part. We want to make this almost universal, where the architect or the GC, it depends on who the players are down the line, and also start with those questions. Okay, so this is how you work if you do that, and ask that person, or your own firm can start actually just streamlining what they're going to use for every project.
Maybe every little player has their own questionnaire.
Right.
That defines the way that they work, and somehow the software kind of brings
That brings in, sorry I'm late, but the important part of what you're talking about. There's a difference between working all this content out and turning it over to someone to code. There's another thing to look at it more like a content management approach, where just what you're talking about, that the content collection for any given entity could be different. So you're more structuring a decision tree and an interrelationship sort of content management approach that can then be flexible as time moves on. And I think pretty simply that if in 6 months, is your flow chart going to look the same or different? Well, you know it's going to look different. So as soon as you hard code in this data, you got a problem. So, the time is more about what's the interrelationship between a client's requirement. Are there categories, like one category is ops focus versus capital investment focus. Another category is it going to be value add to have a price point with it, or is it something that just comes with the generic product? This matrix of interrelationships is the bigger information structural problem, and I think you can only come through that from the work that you're doing right there. But I think we should be thinking about this like a content management system.
I'm thinking of something that's almost parametric, and if something doesn't work out because you made some other decision or you went some other route, it brings that conflict into focus to you.
before you get to that.
So parametric works out well when we're talking about geometry. But content management, what's really running through my mind when you mentioned that is, let's say you are doing this for downstream FM management, and it starts out that you're going to set everything up based, every element's going to have a detailed Omni class, or as detailed as it can be. And you go downstream with that, but then later it's determined, well, we have another way we want to organize it related to Kobe or something else, right? Now you start running into these problems where you need to switch all that. Last thing you want to do is go into Revit and retype all that and change all of it, right? I mean, that's a tremendous amount of effort. So the idea of content management, Revit often is not the best place to change all this information. So, you know, I know that BIMLink, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, if not all of you, that's an opportunity where you can use a program where you could manage all that data via BIMLink, and so you could have that Omni class number, and it's associated with every single element, and you keep a list. So maybe you have what is essentially an Excel spreadsheet of every element type in Revit, and it has its Omni class, but it also has this substitute number and this other number and this other number. And so when you pull it back in, you can choose which one of those you can alter it to. You know, you see what I'm saying? Instead of you retyping it, it just has all that information in there, and you just swap it out as needed.
Yeah.
It's another approach to it. You know, and also in programs like Excel, you have an opportunity to go through and say, you know, everywhere there's a certain Omni class number, it equals this, you know, that sort of search and replace type of thing for other roads, which can then
So maybe we're talking about sort of one document that goes through several phases, where there's an initial generation phase that we put into some magical software that we're all picturing in our heads that doesn't exist, where the owner understands it and it limits information, and they can, even the most unsavvy, go through and spit out some kind of data. Then all that data gets put into some kind of new format that is maintainable, that you can tailor as time goes on, and maybe it's one database that a different program alters. And then there's got to be a third format where you take that and then publish it somehow. And that was another comment from the group in several other meetings, where you could publish it for owner perspective, or you could publish it from architect or contractor perspective. You know, different people are going to want different information out of it, or internal, external, or some stuff like that. So
you could put it on a calendar. I mean,
yeah, you could export schedule only. You could export cost only.
Kind of getting back to the, you know, idea of asking the owner. I mean, it almost seems to me you want it to be a survey, right? Like if you ask the right questions, you'll understand what they want. And so, and I think getting to what you said, Raul, that there are things like we do as part of our, we're going to do it whether the owner tells us to do it or not, because we've decided Revit is our platform. But in order to do certain things we want to do, we're going to need a model from you. So that needs to be shared. You need to know that we need that model, and we need to know what kind of model you are capable of providing, and so on and so forth. So there are different things going on. I don't know that the owner needs to know that. You know, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't hurt that they do. But it seems to me there are different levels of you know, kind of
different levels of interaction with this.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times also you can go into the owner's office for a meeting about the project. You could send them an email with that small survey. They can just turn in, and you can enter all this information into the software. So you know this field needs populating. Who's going to be the general contractor, and who's going to be the MEP. So based on whatever you input from the owner, you will have to populate certain fields within, which is what we want at the end of the day. Actually, we can sit here and dream of a piece of software that's going to deliver us a model, but what we want at the end of the day is a BIM execution plan.
okay, so you said that, but what you actually want is an establishment of the criteria up front, so you know how to perform the work. And the client has criteria that we need information from them on. We also have, as you point out, internal team criteria that is independent of what the client wants. And so there's at least 2 surveys, one that the client is going to require as the terms of the contract, and the other is what the team is committed to do as another group. And those 2 sets of criteria, and maybe the team criteria is multiple sets of those, but let's just say there's 2, those 2 combine to trigger a timeline of decision-making, level of detail requirements on the model, suggested collaboration approaches, et cetera. But the first thing you want to do is establish the criteria by which you're going to do the job. And part of that tool that the client can run through to establish, he doesn't know what he wants, so there's an education component about, okay, I want area information. What kind of area information do I need? Do I need it on the program? Do I need it on just gross to net? What do I need? There's the education part of that. So I got distracted by myself. But, so the establishment of the criteria part is the first thing you have to do. And the outcome is a BIM plan later.
Right. That's
I remember.
BIM execution plan that's done correctly and complete, contains all of that information.
Right. It doesn't have all extraneous information that you don't need.
Right. Yeah, but I think you're definitely on the right track. I would work, and this may not be exactly what you're saying, but what it makes me think is, the problem here is the white sheet of paper when you get ready to start. It's just a little too overwhelming with knowing what you know, all those things you just named that a BIM execution plan needs to be, and you've got a white sheet of paper, so to speak, and it has all this information that needs to be filled out, and that's overwhelming, and it's certainly overwhelming to your client when you bring them into a meeting, and there's lots of information in there that they don't know anything about. Why am I here? Are you wasted? So even though a BIM execution plan has lots of authors, it doesn't mean that everybody always has to be in the room at the same time. And so why not the idea of a really stripped down template or whatever else you want to call it, check boxes, whatever else that can be a part of it. It's very, very limited in terms of the information, so that everybody has a starting point to input information, and then you expand from there, just so that it's more digestible or acceptable.
To combine both ideas with what would be ideal would be you send the questionnaire or the survey to the owner, step 1, and then you input that information, and it generates the survey for your MEP designer, for your civil, for your GC. You send those out. You fill those in. And then it comes up with, okay, we need the heavy stuff now. We need to start establishing calendar and everything. So you finally bring the people on the teams together to hash out the rest of the BIM execution plan. The design team, the construction team, you bring everybody else to finalize, okay, this is all the data that we need to establish now. Thank you for everything else that we have. But I think doing it both ways, doing a small survey for the owner, small survey for each people in the design team and the construction team, and at the end of the day, you can have that day-long meeting with the entire team and present a report to the owner. You don't have to bring these.
But what would make that even more powerful is that if you got your initial survey and say it was a digital format, and it dumped a certain some data into a database that was a specific format.
Ideally, I mean, like what you're
everybody else is using the same.
You have the small ones. We have a database. Let's say we come up with this magic piece of software. We have it. We don't just start handing that out to everybody and have everybody fill in. We do like Raul says. We hand out a smaller portion to everybody else. We get the initial pieces of data. Let's say I, as a GC, am taking charge of this. I will have the database software. I'm going to get all these bits and pieces from the MEP, from the structural, from the designers. I'm going to input the initial information into this. All right, I got the basics down. Now, like I said, we set up the big meeting. When we set up the big meeting, we pull up that software, and as we all just sit here and discuss it, as we're discussing it, we fill in.
And what would make it the most logical approach is to start with the owner too.
Right.
And that's going
Right.
to generate the other survey.
That's right. The owner wants to have COBE, or whatever that acronym is. He wants COBE, so that means something to every player. Okay, owner wants COBE, so that means this from us, this from you, this from whatever. So it starts with the owner. And to your point, you know, the owner's got them. He thinks he's got it all. It's like insurance.
Yeah.
If I get sick, I'm covered. If I want something from that model, I get it because I'm in BIM, right? So what is needed on the owner's survey is some sort of weighting of the relative impact to time and schedule and money. I guess time and schedule is the same. Money and time for their choices. Otherwise, they'll say, I want everything.
Right. That's right.
So it's like these things are sort of cost neutral that kind of come with BIM. And if you want a value-added service related, like additional energy analysis or the FM feed or blah blah blah, and you could group to your point, which I think is a really good one. If the owner survey says these are the things, the value-added components of BIM that can assist in the schedule of the initial schedule and cost of the initial construction. Boom, boom, boom. These are the things that if you opt for them will benefit the operations side of it. So the whole thing is an educational sort of a thing. But at the end, he's got a little thermometer that says, you know, here's my thing. I'm saving money.
Yeah.
I'm spending money.
No.
You know, whoa, wait a minute. I need that's crazy talk. And they can sort of self-edit and prioritize before you get to the point where everybody else is engaged in trying to respond to client requirements that are crazy.
But it may be part of a meeting. That may be where you actually do get in that meeting. In other words, it seems to me.
I think you should do it in a meeting anyway because they don't know what your
Yeah, but you can
language is really important.
In my mind, if you ask the right questions, you can get a feel for where they need to go. And I think the other thing is if you ask questions of the design team, the fact that I say I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do the other, if I answer questions in a certain way and the answers from Raul suggest that I can't do what I'm expecting to do, then a software can say, hey, you've got a conflict. You've got somebody that says they want to do this. You got somebody that's going to rely on an answer that was not there. And I think you could take all that information and in an intermediate meeting, maybe it's not your final BIM meeting, or BIM execution plan, but you could say, okay, Mr. and Ms. Owner, here's the deal. You have said that you like these things, you know, because you're not going to say, if you do this, it'll save you money, because you can't guarantee that. You know, you'd like to think, but you can
That this will take
imply that
design fees to accomplish.
Exactly.
That's what I meant by the saving of
yeah.
money.
You can say, you know, you've said you have this goal in mind, and I think it's going to save money or this and that, but it's going to cost you money as well. And I think that is a discussion that would need to happen, and I think it's probably after the owner is, you know, you've asked those questions, because what's wrong with hearing, you know, you kind of don't want to kill it before it's even started. You know what I mean? Like if they answer yes to a question that says that costs money, they're going to answer no. I mean, that's what happened in this meeting. You know, anytime anybody said, is that going to cost me more? Well, yeah. No, forget it.
Yeah.
Well, and the answer to is it going to cost me more? Is it depends, right?
Right.
We're talking about total cost of ownership or the design fees. So let's a good example is anything that we would do to cut time out of it, which is the model sharing thing, where we have relatively real-time understanding of what people are doing. That is going to cut the communication, the review time. That just goes down. So it's going to cost more to behave in that way, right? But the number of errors and the time it takes to coordinate and all that stuff is likely to be reduced. So it's going to cost you more design fees, but there's potential for time savings, you know, and so there's sort of a double-y thing there. Not guaranteed, but
exactly.
but it's informed.
Maybe it does it like you said. It's kind of hinting at things, but it's not really giving you too specific.
And if somebody's not going to choose, if the client is going to say no because it's going to cost more, it's no.
Yeah.
You know, if our tool says that's going to be more, either more design fees and potentially less of this or whatever, then it's no, and we don't do it. We don't spend time making that a criteria for the project going forward. It's not a problem to say no. You know, as long as the information about total cost of ownership, not direct to the dollar, but as a trend or whatever, is understood by the person taking the survey. And to me, that doesn't close it down. It just gives them a chance to weigh what's important to them. You know, if first cost is a huge concern, then they may not want those extra design fees to help this operations expense.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like you want to ask the questions and kind of see where their head is, and then as a team, or you know, as a team lead, kind of guide, like, you know what I mean? Because some people, they say things. The survey, in my mind, is getting out really what they want. You're trying to really find out what they want. And then once you do that, you can say, well, you've got something to point to and say, you know, I've looked at this information, I've looked at what's happening, and here's what I would recommend. You know, you're giving them the value of your expertise and saying, I see what's important to you. It's almost like programming, right?
It's exactly like
programming. You go in and you say, what do you want? Well, here's my mission statement. Here's what I want to do. Here's what we want to do in 5 years. And then you say, well, based on your budget, you're not doing that. But, you know, and then you ultimately get to a program document, which is your BIM execution plan in this case.
And you also have a situation like where we have large hospitality clients or big banks or whatever, and their facilities management is relatively, you know, it's rolled up in the janitor, in the building supervisor's thing, and that's their FM, right? And so when somebody says that they want all this facilities management tie-in, but they have no plan for actual facilities management, then it's like, okay, so you think you're building, when do you think that FM is going to be up? And if it's not going to be up really soon, the building's going to change enough through maintenance or whatever that construction information is much less valuable. So, I mean, I love this tool idea in terms of teasing out and educating the client, so we can get to a point to when, you know, your client says, I have BIM. It's like I have paint. But everybody knows. Well, what kind of paint do you want? What color do you want? How long do you want it to last? Does it have to smell bad? You know, whatever, because they already know that. And so getting to that point where people understand what they're buying sooner helps everybody, because then you don't have that 2 months before you turn your documents over of this requirement for something that is now incredibly painful for everybody, and nobody wants to swallow that pill.
Yeah.
So I think the front end part of it is huge.
The front end is huge, but it has the potential to become much larger. Because if we engage the owner at this point and educate them, once you hash out the entire BIM execution plan, you present it to the owner, and you can bring up that the way we're developing the inputs and outputs, coupled with a schedule.
That's the power right there.
That's not a management. It's manage the client plan,
Right.
and it gives you the best tool. Yes, because if you tell them that, here, I need this decision here, and keep it like a court date, because if it slips, this is what happens to the architect, to the MEP engineer, to the mechanical sub. We can't order.
But it's not just the owner's decisions, right? It's the structural decision. It's the MEP decision. They're critical path decisions in the entire BIM process that belong to different people. You know, it turns out that we can usually work with our partners. It's the client's late decision that seems like the hardest, but maybe it's just our experience dealing with them.
Well, it's
everybody's.
If I don't have a buy-in, if the architect doesn't have a buy-in from the nurse manager from the 7th floor over there about how they want their nurses station, and you can't schedule a meeting with them because they really don't care, or they're not being managed, the project can slip 1 month, And you're like, okay, I'm sorry, but there's so many decisions that, and what ends up happening, everybody kills themselves to deliver the product by the deadline, but it's incomplete, and then all the RFIs you were supposed to kill are coming back.
Well, the thing is, the critical path construction schedule that we've all seen since we put on our first set of boots, everybody understands foundation, site work, foundation stuff, you know, what has to be in place. And if it's not in place, and sometimes you can't get it in place, you got to make scramble around. So really what you're talking about doing is developing a decision critical path schedule that can be talked about in just the same way as a construction one, because everybody understands that paradigm, right? So if you're like the BIM execution plan, admittedly is important but relatively trivial to me, but the decision plan, the critical path decision schedule, and the client and the project team's criteria for how we're going to pursue the execution of the work, those are the most important things. Everything else is filling in the gaps between those two. How will we get this done, this thing they want done in time? Okay, that's our BIM execution plan. But if all you had was the decision schedule and what is required, the gaps get filled in. The trouble is you don't have those two things. And you have the middle, but you don't have the two things that are the containers for those operational choices, it seems like to me.
I'm wondering if a portion of getting the client to make a decision by a certain date, seems like a lot of it's going to be the money that they're going to have to spend. And so I'm wondering if this tool that we create that has the ability to kind of divide out tasks and different things to different sub-parties could be almost established in a way where you could give the client, like, you know, here is the FM package, and it's almost like ordering off a menu. This is everything that's included. If you don't want the number 7, and you need to go to the dollar menu and buy all these things separately. That way you have a very good basis that everyone before that meeting can kind of input as much as they know about the project to not only show the client, like, here's an FM package, but here's how much it costs, and here's what we think it's going to do to the timeline, and here's an important decision date that we need to know yes or no by, and if you change anything in this, you know, we'll have to get back with you on how it affects everything. But it seems like the client, I'm afraid the client might be very overwhelmed, kind of like all these yes or no to this, yes or no to this. But if you as an architect or a project manager came in and said, you know, here's our recommended package, and kind of talk them through it, I wonder if that wouldn't be an easier way to get a quick yes or no, this seems good or this does not seem good for us.
Here's the fee we quoted. This is what you get for what you're already in for.
I think Nelson was right. I mean, you're always going to have to be able to do it both ways. It's not like you're always going to have to be. There's always going to be somebody you're going to have to walk anything through. Like right. Even if it's typing an email, you're going to have to. Yeah. There's always going to be an owner that doesn't know how to open his email.
I like this because it also sets expectations for the client, for the project team. We decided we're going to do, I don't know, something, and it has implications of responsibilities for all of us, and since we're all working at BIM. So I think figuring out those, which is going to come from, you know, this list, pretty much.
So a diagram like this can get broken up into what you would assign to an owner, the questions they would answer, and then you would sort of group it into what should be assigned to their facilities management people, as well as design teams, GCs. Those become the next tier of questions that go out. Because, I mean, they're responsible for that 10,000-foot view, and then it's up to us to sort of fill out what we think it would take, and then it gets fed back to the owner to say, well, these are the implications of what you're asking.
Okay.
So just flip that upside down. You could start from what the owner thinks. You could also start from what the capabilities of the BIM experience are, and then supersize them up to how they categorize, like, we're able to do blah, do the FM connection. How does that relate all the way up the food chain to a really narrow moment, which is your long-term operations cost, right? And if you start from what the client wants, you might miss out on what the BIM process offers. You know what I mean? It sort of seems like you want to go at it at least from the tiny to the big, and also from the big to the tiny.
I think that's why you would go from the owner down to facilities personnel, and then that would actually then get fed back. And so as that got fed back, we would be able to look at all the information that we would have on the BIM level, and we would be able to take that into the design phase. So and then also feedback to the owner what that BIM requirement would actually cost them.
So is there some new BIM capability that is so new that nobody's really implemented it yet? I mean, do I have an example of that?
There's a lot of
We've done it all.
There's a lot of FM softwares out there that are different. They cater to different, and they're proprietary, some of them as well.
So what I'm saying is there may be something, some service that we can provide through this BIM approach that it's not clear what the what the benefit is, you know. But if you knew about this service that could be provided through this information, then you could figure out, working it from what we're able to do to does anybody even want that. You see what I'm trying to say? Is right now, from the client's perspective, the long-term use, the front-end costs, the saving money on collisions. You know, there's a couple of big rocks that everybody knows about, but there's also next rocks that haven't really emerged yet. And if we start strictly from the client's perspective, we might miss those future capability things. Well, there may not be any, but it feels to me like there might be.
It's kind of hard. I think part of what you want to get there, for example, energy analysis, an energy model. I think that, I don't know what the rate of adoption is, but I think that's where we're headed. Where you start with the energy analysis, the energy model, the architect does preliminarily, and it progresses through the design phase into the construction, and you start having evaluations 1 year, 6 months, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years in. By the time you're starting to to replace part of the equipment, or have identified a need to redesign the system, I think that's one shot of what the future may hold.
Well, another one is you take the BIM model and it's connected to the control systems of the building, the control and alert systems. So all those SNMPG trap things that come from all these devices could be read in a virtual environment, right? So that's something that I don't think anybody's doing. But if you started from, is the client going to say, I want to be able to control my building like a video game? They're not going to say that. But if you're capable of connecting the devices into something that is like that, you know, then that gives them, you see what I mean? All I'm saying is you got to go from top and bottom, and not just from top.
I think you do, because, you know, in my mind, if I'm sending I feel like with a client you want to ask more questions as opposed to tell us what you want. But when you get down to the design team level, we should know what we need to do what we want to do, or, you know, suggest. In other words, I should know I'm going to do whatever it is, and I need a model from this person at this time in order to do that. And in other words, I think you can talk more technically at that point. I think the problem I see is when we start asking clients technical questions. Do you want us to use Revit? I don't, you know.
Well, even the question, do you want BIM? They don't know.
Right.
Whether I want BIM or not is an outcome of these other requirements that I have.
That's right.
If all I want is a good area chart, I don't need BIM.
Yeah.
But if I need that area chart every week throughout the design process, I might need BIM.
Right.
I don't have to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The first question isn't, do you want BIM?
Right.
That's the answer.
But
Therefore, you want BIM.
well, no, but the trend is actually the trend that we're observing is, hey, we want BIM.
That's
without prompting. We don't know why, but we want BIM. We're
No.
pretty cool.
What is that, by the way?
That's why they want a Mac. I mean, it's the same thing. They don't know what it is.
I've heard that saves me money. I heard that it gets me a better building. That's what I want.
And that's also part of the danger because they hear all these things and it's like magic to them. And then when it doesn't produce at the end because we didn't ask the right questions up front, then they want to say, but I told you I wanted BIM.
Right. And BIM's like insurance.
Right.
Insurance without the disclaimer part that says, oh, and by the way, if you have extreme arm replacement surgery, that doesn't count, you know. It's like insurance to them.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of voices out there that are selling BIM software, and this tool and this approach, it can counteract the BIM as a brand and not BIM as an understood deliverable. So if you're putting out information about, and here's what it means, and here's how it can benefit you, but there are choices that you have to make and actions that you have to get in early on, and you know, I love that part of it because Bill Bernstein can stand up and sell this whiz-bang will make your life better all he wants, and he's got there's no ramifications for him. All those ramifications come onto us.
Yes,
and so the education of the pros and cons and the timeline of these decisions for clients really falls to us because there are no other voices out there doing that.
I think some of the more savvy owners they're going to have already or we're going to start hiring really people like us, and they're going to start writing the BIM execution plans or writing down what their expectations are, you know, instead of relying on us to educate them, right? And just have this other person, have this other person take over. Because that's what happens when they say, well, I told you I wanted BIM, and then they don't get what they wanted at the end, right? And so they're like, well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'll hire somebody to make sure I get what I need at the end who can talk that language.
Well, I haven't seen any contracts that have been specific enough to let you write a real serious fee proposal around their requirements. So maybe you're seeing them, but I'm not.
The sort of BIM requests coming from the client?
It's generic. It's BIM.
From what I've seen, it's like they talk about it in the execution plans in the beginning, but when it actually comes down to the contract itself, they forget completely.
It's not unlike what happened when people started wanting CAD files and they talked about their layer standards or whatever. They were never going to use. How many clients actually use those CAD files? Like almost, really few.
Yeah.
So these contracts are really generic.
Yeah.
And so you're really hanging out seriously, because if they take the Phil Bernstein BIM definition, you're in for a fee that is way more than what a competitive fee thing would warrant. And so I hope they get to a point where that they're asking specific enough things in a contract, but I haven't seen any.
I mean, I feel like that's sort of to our benefit, though, and I think that's what we're all talking about here is, how to do that successfully. And you can never get it 100%, but if you get a lot closer, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. You're never going to build a building that doesn't have any issues during construction, but you can get closer and closer to perfection, and then the same is true with asking the right question.
I think what's frustrating from my standpoint is when we want to do something and we have goals on a project and there's nothing we rely on other people on the team to do things, and they just decide midstream that they don't want to do it, because it's too hard. It turned out it's too hard. Right now, you can't go that's it. It dies.
What leverage do you have?
Very, very frustrating. And I feel like if clients understood more about the plan and what you're trying to do and why you rely on each other, then they would be more invested in making it happen. And, I would hope, that's what I've always hoped about a BIM execution plan is you put it together and then it's something you can point at and say, you didn't do that. But the reality is it doesn't happen. You do it and because, so you get in these meetings and everybody agrees to do everything, and then when it comes time to do it, the ones that don't want to say, eh. And
they can't do it. They claim they can to get the job.
Yeah.
We see that all the time.
Yeah.
We're part of a team as a consultant, as a structural engineer, and yes, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time and can do whatever, but then the design lead, said, well, we hired our structural engineer and he's in BIM, so that means we're all in BIM. No, you're still giving me your CAD files, but that's how they won the project.
Yeah.
You're complaining? It used to be a piece of paper.
The contract, and if they don't have any BIM capability, if they say they do and they don't, then they have to hire a third party. And if they hire a third party, there's a certain set of qualifications that they have to follow.
So that's great.
So, we really hold it to them.
Yeah.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
Because, we're offering a brand of BIM to our clients, and, we're going to perform. So, and maybe that's what the design teams need to do, is just offer this brand. Be like, well, we're going to give you BIM, but this is what you're getting. So instead of saying what you want BIM-wise, be like, well, basic services for BIM are.
Yeah, and that's why I think, as we were talking, that needs to be part of it, right? This is what we want to do, regardless of what the client says or whatever. This is what we want to do. And I think, like I said, if you had some means of bringing all the players together and seeing where things don't match up, where you want to do something that I'm not allowing you to do, or vice versa, and then compare that to, the client has said this is their goal and what they believe the world should be. How does that match up? And I don't think it precludes you from saying, by the way, I've got this really cool thing that I think you ought to do as a client. I think you could still work that into it.
It seems like if there is a common basic BIM package that a team presents to a client, that in the meetings that are kind of working all that through, it seems like the team behind the scenes should have the whole list of kind of every possible BIM capability. So they've already planned for, an FM package that maybe the client doesn't want right now, but as you go to present kind of basic BIM services, you present that, and your mechanical guy knows that out of this X amount, he's getting, $2,000, and someone else is getting some amount or some percentage, so that they're kind of tied in from the beginning, and then they can be hands off and let a small team go make a presentation to the client, and if the client wants it, then everyone's basically getting their ad service, and they all know kind of what's expected, and
so it all comes back to educating the client at the end.
Yeah, part of it's, the client, what we're going to tell the clients, also how we're working together as a team, and like you said, holding people accountable. We've said we're all using BIM, we're going to do it to this level of detail. That way, if anybody, another thing about this database is to bring forward those conflicts and resolve them right away.
Right up front, yeah.
Get the owner involved. This guy says he's going to give CAD files for this portion of the project. Do we really want to do that? It's going to cost more money in coordination, So, yeah, Nate dropped this paper on here, and he's got this diagram of the database, and it's got different inputs from owner, project team, BIM operators, and then outputs are reports you can get, either what of all these inputs, what's additional service, what's the cost implications. You can crank out a schedule from this. I know all this is very idealistic, but
not from a relational database. It's not. Doable.
It's all doable, and I think we should definitely.
When you mentioned the
pursue this
content management approach versus the hard coding, is that the content management approach? That's the relational database.
It's the design of the relational database and the software that would allow you to make connections and changes to that.
Okay.
So that's something that we're working on right now, is just this idea of taking Revit out of the center, not having a Revit-centric workflow and having a database-centric workflow, so that everything connects to this database, and the database connects to Revit. Revit's still a very important part, but it's no longer at the center because it's just too difficult.
So you have index codes on individual fields, on elements that can then connect to your other information system?
Right.
main
So
database.
we're in a transition period with a very large project, pilot project, mainly because the project's so large, we wouldn't have any other way to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something that we've been talking about doing.
And what's your connection to, what's your data source? Your data
source.
Your database.
Well, we're in a transitional period with DROFUS right now. And in addition to that, we're using BIMLink. So we think of it as having a melting pot of databases. We also have some other databases with sort of some BIM analytics tools that help us manage.
So it's like a SQL database or MySQL or?
Well, one of them is PostgreSQL, and I think that DROFUS is SQL.
Yeah.
But anyway, the idea here is rather than having one database, you have a melting pot of databases that you can aggregate as needed. So there's various different applications you could use to essentially go in there and scoop up that data, filter out what you need to see, then you make a decision on it, make the change, drop it in. And then if you're in Revit, once you drop that information in, you can pull it back into Revit if that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And it allows you, instead of us, because this is the thing that kills us on these really large projects and managing that content, is not making the changes or making the decision, it's finding the information to make the decision about and gathering it. So in the databases do that stuff great.
They sure do.
So you filter it all out and you have things set up to filter and you have all these comparisons and you spend your time making decisions and making a lot less mouse clicks. It presents you with the stuff that you need to make a decision on, you decide.
Get the right information at the right time.
And then there's
Right, yeah.
the editing happens in the external content management, and then it's pushed
out to the
back into
applications,
the
right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not always necessary to have a two-way communication, but obviously you want to try to have that when it's needed. So it looks real promising, but it's not a done deal.
Can this be like a universal platform where every element gives one unique element ID, and all Revit models, everybody starts to sort of tie into that one central database? And
I think ultimately, it might get to that. Right now,
I mean, there's some things that are like that right now, but I mean, it's kind of, everyone's trying
Well,
to.
I mean,
their
I would say,
product.
so think about this also, though. I'm not sure you want to truly pull each individual element out of Revit and then try to individually manage it. So a great example of this is the approach that DROFUS takes, which is something you can buy off the shelf, so to speak. So everything's organized around rooms, and so you can have all this information that exists in a room, and you can still place, furniture and medical equipment and all these other things in a room. You can physically place it in Revit if you want to, but you don't have to. So in the best case scenario, if you've got a really large hospital, you don't want to populate it with furniture and medical equipment. I mean, not only does it take a long time to populate it, but it makes the rest of the model slow, and then you have to maintain all that. So, it becomes a lot of extra work. So you'll have a typical room, and you'll populate one of those rooms, and the rest of them remain blank. Well, how do you manage that? Well, essentially what it boils down to is having a code, not so much an ID as a code. So you got a typical room that might be an ICU. It has a code. That code in DROFUS translates into, every piece of medical equipment, finishes, furniture, fixtures, all that, and you manage it from there.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point, because I think about that kind of stuff. I agree with you. I think Autodesk sold the idea of, everything needs to be in the Revit model, and they
need a better engine if they're going to put it all in there, because it can't handle it.
That's right.
And it's even scarier that they want to put everything in the cloud.
But and so the approach that you're using, I think, has a lot of validity, right? You have you use the tool that's right for the job, which is a database. What I'm assuming you're working on is, and what I've started wrestling with is, at some point, I want to give my Revit model to the engineer to do something with, and the information that they need has got to be in that model. So, you know, I'm not sure how that database, you know, if you've got certain, like you're pushing
Right.
the information for a particular use to the model, so that when you give it to somebody,
Well, so
as it.
ultimately, yeah. See, here's where one of the other things that changes. Ultimately, we've got to all be working in the cloud together. Hope
Somehow.
Autodesk's cloud 100% of the time. But just having the option to work in other clouds, you know. I mean, I like BIM 360 and some of that stuff, and I wouldn't mind working in Autodesk's cloud as long as I don't have to work there exclusively. So, but the idea of us all working in the same cloud together, so this question of transferring files and all this, I mean, I just find it really surprising that in 2013 we still spend such a large portion of our time trading files around and having FTP boxes and stuff like that. It's like, why are we not just all working in the same cloud together where file exchanges are not, no one's wasting their time with that.
Yeah, I can think of a really big reason why you don't, from just a design perspective, is especially early on when the work is really volatile. Having a shared real-time model is structural, and
Sure.
I'm still changing everything. Having a snapshot on a really big building, having a cohesive idea that then can be worked on, that's an important thing to save time. If I'm working over here and I'm not over there, and you come into the model and you think that's the situation, I mean, I think there's a reason to have these moments of time.
Now,
This is a complete thought for you to now work with.
but here's an implication on
The published part,
just like any other scenario, it wouldn't truly, it's as live as you want it to be, but I think it's very important to, when you're working in the cloud, and we already do things like this where it's not necessarily live, so someone has the ability sometimes on the receipt.
So you refresh the link.
To essentially press a button, and I'm not literally referring to reload, but also the producer has the ability to say that as well. So you have different scenarios. So, you know, you're exactly right. Even on just an architectural project, you've got the people working on the shell, you've got the people working on the interior. They're putting all these rooms together that depend upon an enclosed space in order for the room to produce an area. And they go ballistic when someone on the shell moves it out an inch and all their rooms are destroyed on, 8 floors. And so they purposely set that up so that it doesn't happen, and they will lock down. They will have a user, they'll make a user copy of the shell file, and that's what they link in. And then instead of opening the user file and updating it, they just have a batch file or something. They click on it, and it copies it, and then they reload. It just renames it.
Yeah.
But it does get complicated. If you imagine models in the cloud and you're trying to connect a database to that other people are, it could get.
You have to work out the workflows,
Yeah.
but there's no doubt it's a better solution than trading files all the time.
I think it's going to have to go to that at some point. But
and everybody has access to this database, and they have some people have, if you're a mechanical engineer, you have an ability to read and write certain pieces of information to that database that other people can only read, right?
You just made a database joke. Your head.
There's some. What I find is there are inherent problems to trying to improve Revit. In my mind, like we've done some proprietary stuff. It's all within limits to automate our door schedules, for instance. And it's not hard, but it takes us explaining to our users how to do that, which all sounds wonderful and good until we're on a project with another architect and we've got to share a door schedule. Am I going to train another architect
Exactly.
how to do what I do? I mean, it breaks down like that. So it's just done.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the other thing on this. The reason I like this idea of this database is that we have these discussions in our firm about, oh, but you can do that. It's like, but it doesn't mean it's a good idea or that it's truly successful.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's like if you have something that works that you can do, but it's whether you think it's complicated or not, the process of producing that and using it is complicated enough that most of the other people either don't get it or for whatever reason just aren't willing to use it. They're not willing to follow through with it. So if you take it all the way out to the level of a piece of software, you can have a piece of software that's really powerful and it can do all kind of things. But if only 10% of the people in the office can use it even remotely close to that capability, are you really getting your money's worth out of it? And then you're doing all this training, and it's producing what I think is limited results. I'm not sure that that's the way to go. So you take the idea of these door schedules, you put it in a database that has been around for years, and then you create a dashboard that goes on top of that. The whole idea of the dashboard is anybody can use it. It's not about, it takes all the technical know-how and roadblocks that are technical, and it's all about the information. It just presents you the information, you make a decision, and you leave it at that. No, I think that's much more effective.
Yeah, yeah, it's complicated. I mean, it's, you know, and I, you know, as a CAD manager or whatever you want to call me, I mean, I'm always concerned with my lowest common denominator, exactly for the reason you're saying, because it doesn't matter if my super users can do it. It matters if my struggling users can do it.
More importantly, can your struggling users break it?
Right.
That's right.
Well, if you had,
For everyone else.
if there was a way to take an object's parameter, like, and every service provider had their own slot for a unique index, then the disconnected data sets for each person works no problem. You've got an index on your object, it goes to your database, that's your index. My index is the next field name. And if those can be locked so that you have to have the right author to change that index, then it all works out. But I don't believe there's that capability inside Revit, so you have to make sure that nobody, you know, when it's just you with your data, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if I want to do the same thing, I'm not going to use your indexes because I'm not in control of your indexes, you know. So that's another piece of anything that what you're saying makes the weight of the model and the just the general utility of Revit much better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all want that.
The populating the schedules on the sheet.
Well, it doesn't always populate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if it's a schedule, this idea of
The schedule comes from your database, not from Revit.
Right.
And how
So,
it's tying the sheet.
well, it's not necessarily. So if it's a schedule that needs to go into a sheet, you have a couple of different options. So obviously, you can still create drawing schedules, you know, ones that are going to go on sheets. You can do that in Revit because once you create them, that's it. They're there. They work, and you don't need to keep modifying them. It's all these working schedules that people spend a lot of time. You know, they do things like try to make them highlight and show up in color when it's stuff they need to pay attention to, and they spend a lot of time. And you can get Revit to do it, but you got to spend a lot of time doing it.
Condition the format.
Not everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're just talking about taking that same idea and putting it in an application where it works better. So these other schedules, there's lots and lots of schedules that get in cut sheets and all these things, room data sheets, room development sheets, all these things that can be produced
How does that
somewhere other than Revit.
How does it show up in the contract documents then?
Well, I mean, it seems to me that you could almost, what you want to get to is, you know, you place a door in Revit and it populates a schedule, right? But it's not the schedule you want ever, and so you create a schedule, but what it can't do is if you want one piece of information to manipulate another piece of information. That's where Revit starts to have problems. I think what he's suggesting and what I think should happen is the information about the door goes into a database. You can tie additional pieces of information to that fill out the need of the actual schedule. And then why can't that information, it can have placeholders in Revit if you want for that schedule, and it just gets dumped back in there. So by placing the door in Revit, it gives you the information in your database, which figures out the additional information and puts it back into Revit for you to place on your sheet.
Make the report format from the database be your sheet. It doesn't have to be 8.5 by 11. It can be giant.
Yeah.
You know, it's report writer.
Right, so you eliminate two issues, which is you don't have people going through all these different floor plans, clicking on the doors, looking at the properties, and you don't have them having to produce one or more working schedules to try to review this information to change it. So all that can be done in a different application where you can group that together, make the decisions very quickly, and just push it back out. Again, it's just working in an application that's more suited. I mean, there's lots and lots of stuff that we do in Revit where Revit's just not really the best place to be.
Right. And as we get, and I think, I mean, this has happened in our, I mean, we haven't, I don't know, using Revit 5, 6 years or whatever. You know, it's like the cycle. You get this brand new thing, and you try to make it do things that you've done before, and then you get to the point where you realize I'm beaten to fit. I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and
I'm drawing an axon in Excel.
Yeah, so you're abandoning things now, right? You spent time trying to do these things, and now you've gotten to a level of understanding of Revit where you say, this is ridiculous. Why am I even trying to do that?
We're just trying to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable not having to do everything. Yeah. I think because Revit's been so difficult to work with outside, it's you know, people are always trying to make everything work inside of Revit instead of try to have it be interoperable.
Yeah. I think this FM connection, this external database, is really important because when you start, it's one thing to go look at the properties on the doors. Now we're going to look at the properties on every PIU and every faucet and every, I don't know what else that anybody wants to track.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You should get the purchasing. You get your spec, they purchase it. You pull all that data from their purchasing stuff and connect it up to manuals, and it's all done in a database. You should never be doing that in Revit. First of all, Revit's not a consuming device for anybody who isn't in it all the time.
Yeah.
We need WikiBIM, you know,
No,
or a video game BIM. What's that? It's red. I need to repair. You know, that's what we need.
Yeah, that's
what
I mean,
the build guy needs.
They come up with a few things like
map
that,
guide,
but it's really
like an iPad, you know those iPad things where you go like this and you can see.
reality.
It's like, okay, oh, that one's out of warranty.
Miami,
You know.
Yeah.
all the
you'd be amazed at
Yeah.
crazy. You got UPS coming in here with, you know, 5,000 cubic feet of cargo.
GPS tape.
Where do we have hangars available?
RFID.
You query and it'll
Keep
light up.
everything.
Right.
At the
Cool.
and DWF was coming out, so it was
Fun.
So.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you start getting
Right, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
transmitters and
And you're inside of a
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. We went off on a database tangent. So we always go off on.
But you could probably set up
No,
how do we get our
Part of the fun of it.
inside a building with a certain key to.
right.
Yeah, but how do we stay on track a little bit? So
I think Raul's idea was a good one as far as, because like he and
Oh yeah, just
got
trying
together
just trying to
and
get
kind of started hashing this out.
hours.
It makes perfect sense. These guys being
Imagine that would-
structural guys.
Right.
So I think it might be a good idea to group off as in, you know, the designers.
Right.
You
Designers get together.
get together,
Contractors.
find that you can then.
Well, I mean, you're gonna know more about what your requirements are gonna be for the database.
More than I will.
I think that should be the first exercise, and then after we get together our all inputs that we need,
You could have a,
There's the
you could have a,
dependencies aspect of
if there's
any
some-
relationships.
Yeah.
That's when we may break off or
they have them.
get together and discuss those.
I think we should break off right now and solidify this
Yeah.
per however we divide this. Designers, architects take the ins and outs. You guys meet, hash it out, make sure that everything is clear to everybody within your discipline or within your division. And the next time we come back, say, for example, okay, I've got this is my output, but I figured that my input comes from the architect at this point, and it needs to be this.
Yeah.
And then we go through our list of items, what our outputs are and what our needs are. And at that point, we hash out the structure, but what we need to have is we need to have a way to document it here and to bring everything together as far as the inputs and outputs. Because up until this point, I think on the MEP side, I don't have inputs. I just have what we produce. And I remember discussing that. We need to have that first.
Right.
And what the relationships are, where it comes from, and then we can talk to somebody designing a database so we can make it work as a software. So we need to polish off and be very specific about this.
Yeah.
Let me interject something here. So I think you mentioned this earlier, the idea of coming from both ends and asking, we started off with, what are you going to, asking the owner what they wanted to use it for downstream so that you knew what to do up front. But we also have to do that on the front end, what do we want to do and how do we want to use it. But isn't that what we're really asking? It's not so much ins and outs, but uses.
Yeah.
So shouldn't we be talking about
The
how
questionnaire.
everyone wants to use BIM? How does the owner want to use BIM? How does the architect want to use BIM? How does the engineer? And of course, all that has to mesh eventually, but at least we start out with how do we want to use it, and we list those things.
Maybe we start with the questions.
I totally agree with you.
I think the
Questionnaire. This will kind of say, this is a knowledge base. When we need it, we will
I think the
use
key
it.
is you've got to get the right questions to get the information that you need, and then the answer to the question is going to say, well, what inputs do I need to accomplish that? What?
Right. But just as an example, I mean, you don't have to ask the complicated question up front.
The
about
complicated
facilities-
question.
Well, I was going to say facilities management to the owner. You just ask the owner, do you want to use this for facilities management?
Right, that's the
Answer
question.
yes, the follow-up
Exactly.
questions.
The team kind of hashes out.
But
some
aren't
of
we
that.
working on the first row of those questions? As
Yes.
opposed to all the tiered down?
I would,
Well, but that's,
I would think you would
But you have
want
to come from both sides
You
at
can-
that. I mean, anytime you're, just simplification rule, you may start with simple ideas, but then those simple ideas lead you to questions. And so you get more complex sort of things, and then you recategorize.
Right, I'm just
You kind of have to go both ways.
Right, I'm just suggesting that we have I feel like we're talking about, tier 2, tier 3, and all this down the line questions as opposed to,
Tier 1 and
let's
2.
list out tier 1.
I
What is
agree.
tier 1? List it out.
Tier 1 is the owner questionnaire.
exactly.
Go on a
So-
questionnaire.
I'm
And
suggesting it's everybody. Everybody's got to use for
Yeah.
BIM. And yes, they have to meet, but everybody.
But I'd like to make a separation between the questions we ask the owner and then the questions I ask the rest of the project team. I think those are two separate things. They're equally valuable inputs. Maybe that's the first tier of questions.
Right, I'm saying everybody's got a tier. I mean, for instance, Perkins and Will is going to do energy analysis, period.
Right.
Right?
It's just part
Even
of
if the owner says, I want nothing to do with it,
Yeah.
you're still going to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are certain things you're going to need for that to happen potentially, and it may be from other people even.
Right.
Yeah. I
And,
agree.
and that's the whole point. For example, this one here. You have the owner answers this question. It goes to yes, or it goes to no. If it goes to yes, oh, do you have FM software already? Yes, no. So that's going to generate this. You go, yes, CAD use, model choose. And this one starts to trigger here.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the idea of getting into groups and making sure that the relationships are established and documented. So when the answer is yes, and we get to this point, that's going to trigger a question here.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think I'm referring to facilities management as tier 1.
Yes.
Yeah. And then maybe 2 over there is tier 2, and then the last one's tier 3.
Right, and we can do all the different tiers when we're together.
Okay.
But right now, we will still need the link and all the relationships in the end to produce everything. But we have to come here to do them, and we can't just do them here because we're going to take forever.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I think if we developed a nice set of core questions for clients, I mean, we could implement that immediately. I don't think it would be very difficult to ask any project, say, here you go, would you mind filling that out, and get some immediate feedback on, are these questions getting us where we want to go or not?
Or you could take this whole thing right there that's laid out for you. The whole path is laid out for you, but it could be an investigative thing, like with what's that
Choose your own story.
Choose your own adventure.
Well, no, but you know, there were really quickly. You could take a part like that. Prezi, you could take just Prezi, okay? Facility management, yes, boom, it takes you over here.
Yeah.
Well, what if I picked no? Well, what if I picked maybe? And it just as a learning tool, apart from the survey part,
Right.
just that as a learning tool is a good thing.
Yeah.
You get what the owner wants, what the owner's capabilities are right now, but then what if they want to have?
Yeah.
It might be a teaching tool in a way. Yeah.
The teaching is, I mean, so the first, if you had that with pictures or graphics or more information as required and little hot links on, it's a super huge Prezi or, you know, whatever, multiple tools, even a mind map tool could work. Then that's the starting place, like boom. And then you can connect, you can hotspot that diagram onto all kinds of other branches, and it can just sort of get bigger.
Yeah.
So there's a number of vehicles.
Not to make it too overwhelming for them, because I think an owner wants to know what the first 3 decisions are, but then it's their facilities guys need to pick it up from there, or whoever's down the line. I use facilities guys because that's what we're currently dealing with, because they're completely separated from the management team. Like they have the next section of learning.
That's a really good point. I don't think that, you know, maybe there's something on there that should qualify. You really don't. You probably don't want to get into asking the owner all those
Right.
third-tier questions.
And that's probably where we should start next meeting. Is okay. Let's phrase these. Let's look at the tier 1 questions, and however that data is put in, whether you send a link to the owner, put it in here, or you just send them a questionnaire and you input the data based off of that survey, that questionnaire.
Well, you know,
I don't think that should be that much of our focus.
No,
like,
we don't need to
what are the questions?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, first thing.
Well, I like to tier the next tier. You know, there's a tier left of that. That's these are first cost issues.
Mhm.
These are operational.
Yep.
And that's their language, right?
Yep.
So, what are my first cost issues?
Yep.
What are my operations?
You can use cost as well as benefit. So maybe there's an education portion before this where you say to an owner, well, do you want operations and management capabilities? And you say, before you make your decision, you know, this is what it would cost. Yes, okay, it can be quite costly, but these are the potential. So you just get like those little hot spots where I keep on thinking of it as TurboTax. You know, you have a question, you don't quite know what it is, but you go onto it. And
Learn more.
Hey, there we go. Okay.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
maybe that's actually.
And now I'm depressed.
Are you trying to see how much you're getting back on your refund so you finish a big chunk of questions? It doesn't change with every question.
barometer as it goes. Every
Yeah.
question you answer, it tells you.
So clearly we have precedent.
Well, and also the amount of your refund, and the amount of your refund box is the design and you know, total cost of ownership indicator, higher, lower, you know.
Yeah, so
Turbo
that, it just makes me
Turbo
think,
bin. That's a turbo bin.
you know, this is the structured tier that we want answers to, not necessarily the owner.
But I say we come up with this structure.
Yeah, but this is what's going to feed remember, in the end, what we want is a BIM execution plan with a project directory, project schedule, a level of detail, and
We need all this information in order to do that.
Yeah.
So there is a way. You're going to go through asking questions.
And you could do something where if it was online or whatever, and you ask the owner,
You got nothing to stand around.
say at some point, email to somebody else, owner, who answers these, or you have an idea, let me forward the survey, this portion of the survey to
Yeah, I mean, in addition to like current
facilities manager.
where it could have, FM representative and consultant.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, just to clarify that maybe that's not questions for the owner.
And remember also that the first question is, it's not even a question. It's, I want BIM. Why?
Yeah.
Well, that's what all these questions are going to be.
We're all trying to drive at.
Yeah.
White sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying not to ask that question. We're trying to find out the answer without actually asking that.
Yeah, you don't want to put them on the spot.
But that's the first
Let's say
case.
yes.
We have a blank sheet of paper. Why?
Business.
FM?
In the programming phase. And so that's
A document model, so you can.
So the learning is,
So you can.
yeah, that's what I mean. That's what
For
we need
remodel.
that to generate this list.
I think we should
Questions, and
take
so
a topic like
Maybe
building.
that's where
Some are sector specific,
Sector
some
specific.
are
You take it
generic,
and do this
institutional versus
next month.
commercial.
yeah.
Come back and we all
Yeah.
do our own example. Let's start small. Let's work out a good idea.
Bigger, I
Everyone
mean,
their own idea.
vague or more.
Come back together.
Does it need to drill down into those different?
Version of it.
It seems to me like you could,
I mean,
everybody could go.
this is going to inform. Yeah, we're going to ask the owner certain questions.
Question tree,
How many of these did you do?
degree of granularity that they understand.
That's just one
It could
example.
only
But it's
go
kind of taking something
then
that the owner might want,
at which things really
working backwards. What questions need to be asked?
about which
What do they need to be asked to project team,
finding
the owner?
Right, I think just by,
and you could
just
identify
by having
parts of these trees and also
second, if we want to call it
Other
a tier versus current
natural
software, if it just says
perspective of who has to do it.
FM consultant,
It'll bubble up. I think we're
FM
trying to
representative,
have a streamline
something that's kind of clarifying.
start here and go there, but it isn't really that way. It's more of a
Present this, fine,
mesh
we'll
where
questions.
we have a lot of information and we have
For us to get to the end result, we need answers to
Yeah.
these questions. If you don't know the answers to
That's
those
why
questions, I think that
execution
tells
plans
us
have
a
like
lot.
that principle.
Does.
Right?
Yeah.
Where,
I guess they call them full lane diagrams where you can.
Tells us their level of education on
And
the
it's
topic.
It's a whole method diagram that they use for.
Well, it could, it could be,
We want to get
you're seeing
back
tier
to one
two.
conversation.
You're seeing tier two occurred in the summer. Let's eliminate that.
That's exactly.
But that tier two B,
all of it?
okay. Facility management, yes, facility manager.
What about that?
And if they say, there's maybe a infield or an
it's the same, I forget the name of it, I don't have my
That's not there. I love,
Yeah.
I love.
That's kind of what I was trying to speak to.
Maybe it's not having start one of the.
With one of these.
And then we,
And we, somebody's on the computer. Yeah. Somebody's on the computer like Chris was back in the day.
Software.
especially
And
when
then
we go through
a mind map.
carry on.
industry.
But, and in
The funny
meeting,
thing is, there can be, this is a very simple case.
yeah, yeah.
We can multiply that complexity by 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
Take your own.
All right. I think it's a good idea.
Can you imagine putting your goal
I'm going to start moving most everyone here.
Everybody.
Okay, at that point,
and then you're sort of
Round up.
I haven't seen anything about it.
together.
All right. That's a good idea. And
Oh.
Then you can,
I'd rather get
being in branching,
Signed up.
but without
He takes the
starting with the branch,
the base camp.
I think you just got to get ideas out
We
there
can upload our
with
text
basic
model,
questions.
Right.
Start
or whatever we
with
choose to use.
And how does that trickle down into the action of individual people?
And we can
If you take any topic and go that way, and then go the other way and say, what are the kinds of things that we want to do?
I think,
Where's
do
the
you have Prezi?
proposition for various factories change?
We can use
Not
Prezi
everything you need,
for us starting to map this out, starting with the next meeting.
I believe.
the next meeting,
We've spent like,
come here. This will be a working next meeting. We'll do this.
there's a natural way.
We'll stay on task on the topic.
I mean, everybody should at least have an idea or
Everybody
breakout.
goes back and looks at
Well, I
these.
mean,
We haven't
aside
seen
from
these
that-
in a while.
Aside from that, they should have their own, like with Josh back there. This stuff, right? This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what he put together here, I've actually got something similar. I just don't have it as pretty. Nice little graph. But mine's actually, I've got a 2-page, document that just kind of lists out essentially this thing,
Okay.
format. Diagram. Everybody should have those, and that, in conjunction with this, is start working together and we start putting on the present.
The next meeting is going to be a working meeting. We're going to hash a lot of this stuff out. We'll start with the first topic here. Someone will be running the computer and mind map each little
We've already,
segment.
yeah, bring someone. Before everybody leaves, though, Ken, do we have any volunteers for the May 15th meeting? We've got April 17th PES going to be hosting. We're trying to kind of schedule these ahead of time so we can, so we'll know.
Do we have groupings yet? Are we getting together as groups to hash out these questions, or are we just going on our own?
We're going to do just next meeting is going to be a big working session.
Okay.
We could branch out into separate groups, or we could all just
You should.
hash out.
You should branch out.
No, we
No,
should branch
we
out
have just
because
too many
there's
people
I mean,
talking about
right now we're
the same
pretty
thing.